It has not been a banner week for DC Comics. We got that really terrible Artemis Wanted comic. We got the less bad, but still not very good Black Adam #2. And there's one more DC comic I'm going to cover this week that's worse than both of them. But today we want to talk about some positivity. It's time to spotlight Batman, Superman, World's Finest, Mark Waid and Dan Mora, the best damn comic book that's out on the market today. Easily the best ongoing series that you can go out there and get every single month. This has been an absolute breath of fresh air. This is old school comic book storytelling. This is a writer, Mark Waid, who I personally don't like, but I can see that he actually likes comic books. He's not embarrassed by the fact that he is a comic book writer, and you definitely see that by a lot of the other writers in comic books, specifically DC and Marvel doing superhero fare and trying to do everything but superhero comic book storytelling. Batman Superman really feels like a love letter not only to DC Comics, but superheroes, comic book history, and everything like that. And that's why it's been so good since day one. I've been recommending it from the very first day, but we haven't gone in depth about what makes this comic book series truly spectacular and special. We are on the 5th issue. This is the end of the first story arc. We're moving into this Batman versus Robin thing somewhat in the near future. And I thought this comic book really encapsulated a lot of the things that Mark Waid is doing, along with Dan Mora, that are absolutely perfect. And I needed to highlight it and show you that they still can make good comic books. Now let's talk about why this thing is so spectacular. If you're not reading this, I understand if you don't like Mark Waid. If you're missing good comic book storytelling, this is where it's at. The first thing I have to talk about is the art from Dan Mora. There is not a panel wasted in any of the 5 issues of World's Finest that have been released so far. One of the things I've noticed within the comic book industry as of late, that people seem to think lots of detail means good comic book art. Having detailed illustrations doesn't hurt, but Dan Mora understands comic book storytelling. Sometimes you don't want to detract from the action or the moment that's being portrayed in the picture you see in the top. We get Robot Man punching the Devil Nazar. That's an important moment. Why distract the reader with a bunch of background details? Use a little negative space and highlight what's going on there. And they're delivering exposition through conversation through the characters. We almost never see the same angle of the character's face twice. It's always moving around as far as the angle at which the character is speaking to the reader, which I think is very helpful. A lot of times, if you see the front of the face, he shows you the emotion of the character, and then the next time they speak, you'll see the back of that character's face, so you can see who they're speaking to and see the emotional reaction on their face. That is comic book storytelling. This is an action-based medium, and one of the ways to get across your story and how people are feeling, obviously, is through facial expressions. We get that a lot with Dan Mora and World's Finest. Another thing that he does, which I think is really great, he is not boring with his layouts. A lot of artists will use the same layouts over and over and over in their comic book stories. If you read World's Finest #5, you won't see really the same layout twice. In any of the 24 pages, he's always finding new ways to tell a story, lay it out, and keep it visually exciting to draw the reader in and make the next page just as exciting as the previous one is. That is visual storytelling in the comic book medium. It's a lost art form, but Dan Mora has the goods in spades, and you will see it the entire time I talk about this comic book. Another problem within comic books these days is the stakes are always so enormous. It's always the world is about to collapse or the galaxy is going to implode on itself. Here we have in the beginning of this story, the Devil Nazar, who's the villain that Mark Waid has introduced, and he's very powerful. And certainly he is a world-threatening force within this story. But this moment, they're setting up stakes that are much lower. Supergirl traveled back to the past with Robin, and they found out how you can trap the Devil Nazar in a tube, and it must be sealed with this enchanted talisman. But somebody from their team must go in with the Devil Nazar to seal him in there. You have to seal it from the other side. Those are pretty big stakes, but they're very personal stakes. The world isn't going to end when this moment happens. One of these heroes, one of the Doom Patrol, Supergirl, Superman, or Batman are going to have to sacrifice themselves essentially to trap this very powerful villain behind the door, and it's a very selfless sacrifice. Those are cool stakes. It doesn't have to be the end of the world to make the story feel important. This is a good way to do that. And when you have stakes that are very personal and smaller level, you get really great character moments. Because, of course, Superman is the most selfless man in the entire DC Comics universe. He says, give me that. If there's no other way, I'm going to do it. But Batman is the smartest and most strategic hero in the DC Comics universe, and he knows Superman is vulnerable to magic, which Devil Nazar has in spades. So he says, no, you can't do it. I'm going to do it, because if you were in there, he would destroy you because he has magic. You would be mortal just like me, and I'm a better fighter than you. And then the Doom Patrol says, you know what? You two are the most important heroes in the entire world. We're expendable. We're going to do it. It's going to be one of us. Wow, heroic moments where heroes want to make sacrifices and save their friends. You don't get these kind of moments in comic books, but you get these kind of moments in every single one of these issues. And then you have a great moment from Supergirl, who's feeling a tremendous amount of guilt because she happens to have lost Robin, somehow traveling between times. And she says, shut up. It's not up for discussion. I have to be the one to make the sacrifice. It's what I deserve after I lost Robin. Wow, a hero feeling guilt and deciding they need to make the ultimate sacrifice because they made a mistake. These are wonderful character moments, and you're going to get a lot of these moments in this comic book, not just a moment per issue. You're going to get several moments for every single character, and that's why this thing reads so fantastic. It's also paced like a 1980s or 90s comic book. It's not written for the trades. What Mark Waid has accomplished in these first 5 issues would take another modern comic book writer at least 2 years to do. So it reads like a breath of fresh air, although newer comic book readers are probably going to be overwhelmed by the amount of story Mark Waid is able to put into one comic book. The backbone of Batman and Superman World's Finest certainly is the relationship between Batman and Superman and their trips around the DC Comics universe and really getting some cool Easter eggs, adding the Doom Patrol and whatnot. But the foundation of this story is all based in action. You are not going to go 2 pages without at least an action scene. And a vast majority of the time, if you have characters standing around and talking, at least half of that page will also be dedicated to action as well. This is an action-based storytelling medium. Mark Waid gets that, and you are going to get an action-packed comic book every single issue, at least the first 5. Another thing that we're seeing in a lot of comic books is they're trying to be additive by adding new things, by destroying things from the past. Here, Mark Waid is being very additive with this new character, the Devil Nazar. Well, he's been around there forever. He must have been the Great Darkness from the very beginning, or this is actually Superboy Prime, and he had him under control from the very beginning. No, quite simply, he is a very old entity. He's very powerful, but he's been locked in a tomb for thousands of years. So we can add a character that's been around essentially for thousands of years, but he hasn't been in DC Comics continuity because there's a reason for that. So you're adding to the tapestry of the DC Comics universe with this new, very powerful villain without having to go and destroy something that already exists. Almost no modern comic book writers can do that. Mark Waid is giving lessons to these jabronis. Not every new villain has to have just arrived at his villaindom that very day. He could have been a villain for thousands of years, but with good quality storytelling, you can add to the lore and mythos of the DC Comics universe without destroying other people's work. And one of the things that we've learned about the Devil Nazar, not only is he magical, not only was he trapped in a tube 1,000 years ago by the warriors of G, but he's also adaptive. He is able to adapt to the things that you're doing, especially if they are from the era that he came from. So we end up with that nice moment where we have Robot Man punching him in the face because he would have never seen robots at his time. And then we get this nice logical moment from Superman after he was briefly controlled by the Devil Nazar because he is vulnerable to magic. And he says, well, if he adapts to everything that he knows, let's bring out some Kryptonian technology. Wow, this actually exists in the DC Comics universe. And he's going to send him to the Phantom Zone, something that's already existing in the DC Comics universe. So Mark Waid is introducing a new character, giving him vulnerabilities and strengths, and then utilizing the things that already exist in the universe to make the heroes seem like they're smart and are able to overcome the villains. And this makes a lot of sense and is very smart on Superman's part. So he's going to send him into the negative zone. Is that going to hold a character like the Devil Nazar and the powers that we've seen? Absolutely not, but it's at least going to give the heroes some time. Now, I imagine they thought they were going to get more time than they do because he does overcome the negative zone in pretty quick fashion, but this is good logical storytelling, and he didn't have to use a deus ex machina or a MacGuffin to overcome the obstacles that he's put in front of the heroes in the story. And when you have beautiful art and real stakes, fantastic action, additive pieces to the DC Comics universe, logical story progression, you get more great character moments like this one. The Devil Nazar returns through the negative zone. Superman picks up the enchanted talisman, the seal, and throws himself and the Devil Nazar into the tomb to seal it so he can save the world and his friends in the same moment. That feels like a very Superman thing to do. This is a wonderful character moment. This celebrates who Superman is and the character that he's been for over 80 years in comic books. But it also gives you this great moment because of Dan Mora and the art where you see Batman reacting to it. Superman, as he realizes he might never see his best friend again. His best friend has made the ultimate sacrifice and sealed himself in there. Now, thankfully, Superman knew while he was doing this that Batman is super duper smart and was going to be thinking about a strategic way to potentially bring Superman back from the brink because he's already lost Robin anyway. And they see the crack that the Devil Nazar had escaped through the first time. It's almost closing. They send the Negative Man in there and everybody else, and they end up dragging Superman out at the last second. Check this out. More wonderful characterization. Superman, took you long enough, speaking to Batman. Batman saying that was a hell of a gamble. He says, I was depending on Batman to notice something. That's not a gamble, that's a plan. Wow, the characters are smart and aware of the strengths and weaknesses of their teammates and best friends in the DC Comics universe. And Superman was willing to make the ultimate sacrifice, knowing that he had a pretty good chance to come back because Batman was going to realize what was going on. And we also get some extra images of what it would have been like for Superman to be trapped in there with the Devil Nazar. It literally would have been hell for him. He even says at one point, he would have flayed me alive. More stakes built up in the universe as they're building up the Devil Nazar to be a pretty big villain in the DC Comics universe in the end of 2022. Another story trope that's absolutely destroying comic books these days is the 5-page epilogue. They will close down the final act of a story into like half a page now so they can have 3 or 4 pages of exposition explaining what's going to be happening in the future. I don't think you always need an epilogue, but if you have one, it better be one damn page, and that's what we get here. I told you earlier, Robin is lost, and we see here the epilogue at the tomb of the Devil Nazar years later, and we discover that it's also on Lazarus Island, which ties into the Robin story that Josh Williamson was telling in the Robin series, and they let you know that the story will be continued in Batman vs. Robin from Mark Waid. Batman Superman, World's Finest, is why we read comic books. For wonderful action, wonderful character moments, logical storytelling, superheroes being heroic. And unfortunately, we don't get that a lot in comic books. But I definitely wanted to utilize this story today and let you know why this thing is so spectacular. I understand if you can't read it because Mark Waid's an asshole. I totally get that. But if you can, and if you've been waiting for a good story to read, this thing is waiting for you to pick it up if you haven't already. It's absolutely brilliant. It's wonderfully illustrated. It's so action-packed. It's well-paced, wonderful characterization. It's everything I would ever want in a superhero comic book story. Other writers out there should be breaking this comic book apart and studying it and finding out how to be superhero comic book writers. You're not an LGBTQ romance writer when you're in the DC and Marvel universes. You're not a slice of life comic book writer if you're in the DC and Marvel universes. These writers need to be able to embrace the mediums, the characters in the history like Mark Waid and Dan Mora have in Batman Superman's World's Finest. If you're looking for more great comic books that have come out in the year 2022, I still say this one's number one. I've got 9 other comic books I talk about in this video, the 10 best comic books of 2022 so far. I've told you what number one is. Go find the rest.